Welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book.
And then see the movie.
I'm the writer.
And I'm the filmmaker.
And this week, we discuss the first half of Jeff Vandermeer's 2014 weird sci-fi novel, Annihilation. Where lies the strangling fruit that came from the hand of the sinner, I shall bring forth the seeds of the dead to share with the world. James, I'm excited to hear what you think of this novel. It is our first weird literary experience I think we've really gotten into, and I mean the weird genre. What do you think of this novel, just in general, so far?
I mean, I think it's pretty weird. I mean, I do like it. I wasn't expecting it to be as as weird as it actually is, because I was expecting more of like this sci-fi adventure, and it's kind of just like really leans into specific details of weirdness and like exploration of them.
Interesting. Yeah, this is one of the few novels where so far that we've read where I've really not known what you're going to think of it. Like I'm really curious to hear what your take on it is, because a lot of my take is very bound up in my history with writing and with reading and the kind of things I like. And I don't know, like there's certain things about it that is very wound up in me liking this novel so far. But I know that that's not something everybody shares. And you can look at this novel on Goodreads and see that it is pretty polarizing in how people respond to it. And if you read it, you can see why. Like it is written in a really, I don't know, erudite, esoteric kind of way that can lose a lot of readers, I think. And it's got a real literary flair to it, which is something I studied in my undergrad, and I grew to love literary stuff. But a lot of genre readers, especially, don't react well to like really overly literary writing. But what's also really interesting about it is this novel is written in kind of an epistolary form, which means it's like we're essentially reading something written by a character. So there's a level of separation there. And because of that, there's a lot of really interesting things that he can do, because we're essentially reading the biologist's journal, right?
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know, there's a lot of like layers to this, and I definitely am excited to like talk about them more at length. But I guess we should go ahead and talk about this podcast for anybody who might be checking in for the first time.
Yeah, what we try to do on this podcast is we cover source material, usually a book, and then we move on to the film adaptation. And in this case, we're doing Annihilation, and we're seeing the Natalie Portman, Alex Garland directed Annihilation in theaters very soon.
Yeah, I'm already super hyped, and it's only going to grow. Like I can already feel that I'm going to be super hyped for this movie. But we try and provide kind of a creator point of view, because I'm a writer and James is a filmmaker, as we introduced ourselves at the beginning, which, by the way, is a reference to the book if you haven't read it. In the book, all the characters just refer to themselves by their titles. Nobody has names. So that's what that was.
Yeah, I actually like that too. I think it's really unique, at least as far as like sci-fi creature stuff. Like I feel like it's just like a unique thing to do.
There's a lot of really interesting things he's doing to unsettle us, to make things less familiar. Like there's a lot of things that we would grab onto normally in a story. And character names are just a minor thing there, but there's just so much that's being done to like keep us uncomfortable. And I think that discomfort might be off-putting to some readers, but it's something I find really cool, because I can see that I'm being manipulated by the writer, and I appreciate, I guess, what goes into that.
I'm sure this is what the writer wanted me to feel, but I found obviously that it's really dehumanizing to have them just be their titles like that. Like you're not attached to a character. Specifically, we'll get into this, but specifically I was really dismissive of the psychologist like fairly early on. I was like, oh, that's a bad guy because of the things that she was doing, and we'll get into it.
Yeah, I should say that we're going to keep this intro spoiler free as much as possible. Just going to talk mostly general reactions. I'm going to talk a little bit about Jeff Vandermeer. That'll be the first thing I do. But we'll let you know before we dive into like spoiler territory, so that you can, if you want, you can check out if you don't want to get spoiled.
So tell me about Jeff Vandermeer.
Yeah, this is just stuff I've found on the internet. It's not like I know him or anything. I do know that he is he's a writer who's well regarded. He's won a bunch of awards. He actually attended the University of Florida for 3 years.
Represent.
Yeah, and he lives in Tallahassee now. And this, I read that this book is based off of a national wildlife refuge called St. Mark's that is in, like, it's really near Tallahassee if you look on the map, actually. It's, like, kind of on the Gulf. And all the way down to it has, like, a big old light tower in it. And nice. he said that he went and he was, like, walking through it when he, like, came up with the idea for this novel, which I think is pretty cool.
That's awesome. It's cool.
Yeah, and so I am a transplant to Portland, Oregon, but I grew up in Florida, and that's where James still lives. And I don't know about you, but the descriptions of the wetlands and the environment of Florida is really striking to me, and it was really evocative and like bringing me back to some of the more beautiful and bizarre kind of things you can find in Florida. I don't know.
Yeah, I found it. I thought it was cool because it talked about how just the different types of terrain that are fairly close by. So it's like there'll be like a swampy area and then like a more foresty area, and like that kind of thing is very, very much kind of Florida.
Yeah, and he does a really good job of tying in his descriptions of the environment with everything else that's going on, because we know that the premise is that there's this area called Area X that some sort of event, a mysterious event we don't know much about, has happened there. And everything inside that area is weird and like unknown and mysterious. And these, our main character goes in as a part of an expedition. And as he's describing how things look, he also is infused with the observations of this main character. And through her eyes, we can see that she's being affected. I think being affected mentally by what's like this area. Yeah. And it's really cool how that comes out in his prose. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. I can't wait to jump into so much of this because like I just want to talk about the main character, and just so much.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, with Jeff Vandermeer, I mean, he's written a bunch of novels. He got really well known for this trilogy. This is his like break into the mainstream. He writes a lot of weird literature, weird fantasy. He also writes some books for writers that I've read. One of them I think is called Writing Life, or A Writer's Life, that talks about like how to balance your creative life with your day-to-day life and like family life and stuff like that. And it's a very practical guide to living as a writer and a creator. And I have read that, and that was really, really cool. And then I know he's really well known for a book called The Wonder Book, which I don't have, but I am very curious about. So, in addition to his novels and stuff, he also writes stuff for writers, which I think is pretty cool.
It's cool. It's cool that he can be successful doing both, being more practical as well as diving into this just cool sci-fi stuff. Is he primarily a sci-fi writer?
I mean, let's pull up his list here. Yeah, so he's written a bunch of novels, and collections of short stories, novels like Venus Underground, Shriek and Afterward, Predator, South China Sea, Finch. But like I said, none of these had really broken through to the mainstream until he wrote his Southern Reach trilogy, which begins with Annihilation and then goes to Authority and then to Acceptance. It's interesting because all three of those novels were published the same year.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of content.
Yeah, all in 2014.
That's wild.
And yeah, he's won a lot of awards, multiple World Fantasy Awards. He won a Nebula. He's won a Locus, a Hugo, the Shirley Jackson Award for this novel. really just a highly decorated, especially for this particular book. Bram Stoker Award, Philip K. Dick Award. Telling you, all kinds of awards.
Wow.
So I think that's enough. Yeah, I mean, he's a really interesting guy. I'd love to meet him. I hope I do one day. This book is fascinating to me. I haven't finished it yet, so I can't really say for sure how I'm going to feel about the novel as a whole. But right now, like it's got its hooks in me. And I should also say that I got a physical copy of this book. I often do audiobooks, which I'm a proponent of audiobooks. We often, have an Audible ad. Some people aren't, but I like them. But for this book, I'm really glad I got the physical copy because I found myself rereading a lot of passages because there's a lot of meat on them bones, and you can easily miss things if I was just listening to a narrator, it'd be really hard.
I didn't get a physical copy, but I did get an ebook and read it on my own this time around. And I just want to say I really like the cover. Like, I really think it's cool how he has like I looked at all three novels covers, and I think it's cool that they're pretty much in the same vein, and it's so interesting looking.
I agree. I think it's a striking cover. I've seen some other novels kind of copy this because I think you see that a lot, like kind of copycat styles. But I believe this is the first to really do this thing. It's got the 3 letters in multiple lines. It's got this really striking off-white color with like a really bright green kind of vine thing. I don't know. It looks really cool. I agree. I really like it. Okay, I guess let's move on to our general thoughts about the part. I should, I don't know if we've said this yet, but we read part 1, 2, and 3 of a 5-part novel. So we're actually a little over halfway. If you wanted to follow along, I guess first off, like, who should people read this book from this bit you've read, and who would you recommend read it, and maybe who would you say maybe not?
Well,
would you recommend it for everybody?
I honestly probably would recommend it for everybody, just in broad sense, but more specifically, like if you're interested in sci-fi in any way, like this is just it's very fun, interesting, and the word that I'm going to use 1,000 times in this episode, I'm sure, is just like exploration. It's like very specifically like it's in its own vein of like, it kind of reminds me of like a space adventure where they're like venturing out into the unknown, or like deep sea where they're like deep underwater, and I just feel like the exploration of this is such a strong facet, because there's tons of stuff that's like normal at first, and as we get deeper and further along and we get to know, I think all of these things correlate, so I'll just say this now, but as we get to know the main character, the biologist, more, we also get kind of further into the weird. We see more creatures, we hear about more things going on. It also, as we explore, we see like very specific details about this world that I just think are really interesting.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just want to add to that. I think that the exploration is a creepy one. It's an exploration into something unknown yet ominous, yet kind of terrifying, kind of, there's a lot of, insanity, I think, plays a big role in this book. And the reason I point that out is just because that's something I didn't realize about this novel. I think the trailers prepared me for it, but if I had just picked this novel up cold, I maybe wouldn't have realized how creepy it is. So I guess that's my thing. So if I'm going to suggest it to someone, I don't want them to think, when I say fun space exploration, you know what I mean? Like, that sounds like a different kind of novel than this. This is more like, was it The Abyss or Alien? You know what I mean? Like, it's an exploration novel with an undercurrent of like something ominous and bad is going on.
Yeah, it's got like this really, it's really tense a lot of the time. Like, it's very much like, it's like exploration, but it'll be like exploring something specific where you're like, oh my god, something's gonna happen right now. Yeah,
and I guess I want to just underline that for people who are trying to decide if they want to read it. I am someone who has read a good amount of horror and has seen a lot of horror movies for sure, and I consider myself not easily scared. But this novel isn't a jump out monster, gross you out with gore, that kind of novel. This is very atmospheric. This is very, like you said, like tension builds. It's creepy, and that is very hard to do. And I found myself getting like actual chills reading some of it because of how creepy it got. And I think that's really cool. So if that sounds like your bag, then I highly suggest you read this novel. But if you're like the kind of person who can't do that, like knows that you're not going to enjoy that, then maybe not,
Yeah, good point.
All right, I think I'm ready to move on to our spoiler section. How about you?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so for those of you who this might be your first time listening, we kind of go through it scene by scene. Maybe not every little scene, but big scenes. We go through it chronologically and we talk about it at length. So we're going to start doing that now. If you've read it, you can follow along. If you're just curious about it, this is a good way to find out like what kind of things go on in the novel. Like maybe you went and saw the movie, in the future, and you've come back to read, for this now. This is what you're going to get. So
yeah, welcome to the past. How's the future? Is it getting better out there?
All right, so the first section is called Initiation. And we meet our main character, who is the biologist. And she is in a group with people who are described only by their titles, the anthropologist, the surveyor, and the psychologist. And they're all entering a place known as Area X. They're all women, and the psychologist is the leader. We learned that they've gone through some sort of training to be here, and through the government, but they do seem to be civilians with maybe some military background for some of them. But it's basically like a civilian expedition that's come into this area. Area X is a section of Florida that has been kind of quarantined off and has some sort of barrier that's mysterious and has been, abandoned. And we hear that there has been 11 previous expeditions, and they are expedition number 12. And they are on their way to base camp. And on their way there, we hear about some of these previous expeditions. We find out that the previous expedition showed up at their homes with no explanation for how they got out of there. There's lots of weird things that are described going on here, and I don't know how to really describe it all, but I'm going to have to drop some details that come out later. The first thing that happens is that here's a line that gets dropped that I just want to read verbatim that I thought was cool because it to me it felt very thematic. Our main character is basically writing a journal and of her observations, and that's what we're reading. And she says, "When you see beauty in desolation, it changes something inside you. Desolation tries to colonize you." And I think this is a very telling thing. There's a lot of this place is very invasive, and their presence in it, they're not just like able to just walk among it and just look at things. They're constantly under attack from it. It feels like to me, like it's always fucking with their minds. It's always affecting their mood and everything,
Yeah, definitely. I don't want to get too spoilery, but for
hey, we're in the spoiler section.
We're in spoilers. So as we go on, we kind of get this. It's just interesting because there's like multiple things manipulating people, whether it's like persuasion or hypnosis or whatever this is, and then there's also kind of the world that they're in here, like this little Area X section, and it seems like it's just too far ahead. Basically, the hypnosis is brought up, and it. At first, I was like, this doesn't really have a place here. And then as I see how the place affects each individual character, I can see how being able to hypnotize the rest of your crew could potentially help out, because our narrator is so like, she's so clinical, and she almost seems unreliable at first. And like, as we get to know her better, we bond more with her character. But at first it's like you don't really know what to make of her. And you're like, maybe these people do need to be in hypnosis at some points because they're training or whatever it is.
Yeah, I was going to say the hypnosis, I believe, gets introduced in a very like benign way. It's introduced as something that helped them get past the barrier. That apparently passing through the barrier is like a really harrowing thing, and like people struggle to do it. So they agreed to get hypnotized in order to go through it. And the psychologist is kind of in charge of this hypnosis and kind of bringing them back. What's cool about the hypnosis and why I think it really works is a big part of this novel is the unreliability of our perceptions and of our minds in general. And it reminds me of a video I actually shared, I think, on our Twitter account, because it's the guy who makes it's a Vsauce 3. I've mentioned Vsauce in a different video, but this is a Vsauce 3. But he did this video, and it's called, I think it's like, Could You Be a Parasite, or Are You a Parasite? And the reason I immediately think of this is in that video, he describes a lot of different organisms and funguses and viruses and parasites that control the minds of the hosts to make them do certain things, like make them grow up to the top of things so that they can like spread their spores and all kinds of stuff. Like it's pretty gross, but if you have a strong enough stomach to watch it, it's really cool because he extrapolates it out to say, if you were infected by an organism like this, you wouldn't know, is the thing. You would feel compelled to do things because that's how this parasite works. But you wouldn't realize that the source of the compulsion. And that kind of stuff is, I think, exactly what's going on here. And I think if you look at hypnosis as a way of suggestion and mind control itself, I think it all kind of overlaps in how we want to think of our minds as being these like impenetrable fortresses where who we are is so clearly defined, but really they're not. And there's a lot of things that can affect your mind and change the way you think and perceive.
Yeah, and I mean this novel definitely deals with that in multiple ways, like you're saying, the hypnosis and I mean later on there's some sort of biological thing that happens to our narrator, and we'll get to that.
Yeah, let's get to it. I mean, that's about to happen. So they arrive at something, and this is where I totally agree that she feels a little bit unreliable, because they find this thing. It's like a hole in the ground, but it's some sort of structure, and she keeps calling it a tower, and then she even says, like, it's not a tower. It just goes into the ground.
Yeah.
But she says it to the other people, like, oh, look at this tower, and they're like, tunnel? Like, what do you mean? Like, none of them know what she's talking about, but she consistently like feels like they're wrong and she's right. It's a tower, and she can't stop thinking of it that way. And to me, yeah, that was like, okay, she's a little bit nuts already, exactly. Right?
And we also get her saying, like, we get her thoughts about the situation where she's saying it and she's seeing that like the rest of the crew is like thinking that she's crazy, so she kind of backs off it a little bit. But she still she still like corrects people when they call it the tunnel, like in her mind and stuff. And like, yeah, it's just like, so what did you make of that? I mean, I know we learn more about it as we go on, but like, what did you make of that when we were in this chapter, when it was first happening? I was like, what is going on with this tower thing?
Yeah, at first I thought it was a clear sign that she was going insane, and this was like, it had already started and she was starting to really lose it. That my perception of her changed as I read more. That could still be happening, but maybe I'm maybe I'm slowly becoming insane with her. I don't know. Exactly. But it's what's really cool about it. But yeah, early on, I immediately go, okay, this is an unreliable narrator. Like, I see what's going on here with this story. But I also love that, like, we're so married to her perspective, because this is like her notes. Also, she refers to you, the reader, several times. She says, you might think this and you might think that. And I thought that was a really cool way, and not like a parlor trick sort of way, but like a way that made sense for this story to like draw me into it in a cool way.
It's not like a fourth wall break where it's like, oh, look how meta we're being. It's like we're reading a journal, so it's like it kind of just makes sense for the fact that like if somebody, like, she's keeping these scientific notes or this journal at least for people to find eventually or read it when she gets back, and so it's cool. It makes sense.
Yeah. So they arrive at this tower and they decide to go down into it. It's a tower of unknown origin, and they've like memorized this map of the area of Area X. And this tower, I'm going to call it tower because that's what she calls it.
It is a tower. I mean, what are you talking about? It's a tower. It's a tower.
Yeah, you mean tower? Yeah. So it's not on the map that they have studied. But it's weird because it's so obvious to like how everyone who's been here must have seen this thing. Why is there no record of it in all these other records? Because a lot of the records from the other expeditions have been recovered. But we do hear that like more comes out as we go, but like there was an expedition where they all killed each other. There was an expedition where they all committed suicide. There was the very first expedition came out and reported that like nothing was off and that it all seemed fine.
Mm-hmm. The first one is very interesting because it's like, did things evolve to this state in like some sort of accelerated way? And like kind of, I don't know.
It seems like maybe things have been getting worse or like more pronounced or something. I don't know. Evolving, growing. There's a lot of that, so that would make sense.
Oh, I feel like we should mention that the last expedition that happened, she talks about her husband was on it, and like one of her motivations for coming into this area.
It doesn't come out till later, but I think it's fine to mention it here. It's prominent in the trailer for the movie, so. But we later learned that her husband was a part of this last expedition, Expedition 11.
The ones that showed up mysteriously back in their homes.
Yeah, he just returned home out of the blue and then didn't really have any memory of how he got out of Area X and got home. That's like a full-on scene later that we get. That's pretty cool. But for now, I should also say that they all have kind of like old, dated gear. They have a few guns. Only one of them has like an assault rifle. Otherwise, they have some handguns. It's interesting because it's not really like said what the threat is, but we get an implication that there is a threat. And maybe they don't know it, but like it's interesting that they have guns in general, right? Like there's some sort of threat implied by that.
Well, and speaking of the gear, it's very specifically stated that like all of it's like older and they don't have any new tech. They don't have any like specific gadgetry other than one specific thing that they have.
Yeah, they don't have any phones or radios. Yeah, they just have they have this one little black device that's like on their belts. And what it's supposed to do is light up when they're in like a dangerous situation or something. And then that's supposed to be their cue to like try and get extracted. And they don't know how it works, but it supposedly is like, detecting things.
Yeah, they don't know how it works and they don't know what the extraction point is or how they would even know to extract them.
Yeah, and I immediately was like, this light thing is a trick. You know what I mean? Like it's a false sense of security that was given to them.
Right. Yeah. Like a placebo.
Exactly. That's what I think. It doesn't do anything. But like it might turn on at some point, but it feels to me like it doesn't do anything. Now I could be wrong.
For it being there, there's like a certain amount of significance to it. Because it's like, it wouldn't be, I like, even if it is this moment where it's like, oh, we're in such mortal danger, we need to be extracted, and it doesn't light up, then that would be rough. But like, having it kind of be obvious that it's a placebo, and then having it actually light up or do something at some point, I think would be even more surprising.
Yeah, I think it will probably turn on, because it probably does react, but like, it could still be a placebo in the way that, like, what is it going to do? You know what I mean? Like, they're miles away from help.
Right.
And you know what I mean? In hours and days. And, like, if there's an immediate threat and this light goes on, like, it's not going to help you. Yeah. So in that sense, it is still a placebo. You know what I mean?
I'm sure it has something to do with, like, tracking them or, like, some sort of black box or something for, like, if they die and they find, I don't know.
That's yet to be determined, I guess, in the second half here. But so that's their gear. And they decide that they're going to go down into this tower. And our main character says she feels like they're at the top of it, and she actually feels like a sense of vertigo for like how high up they are. It's all weird, like it's all like kind of mind-bending perspective stuff. And they enter this. Oh, before they go down, I guess I should mention this because I don't know if it might be really important in the second half. There's a big wild boar. And it's described as being like really big, bigger than normal. And it charges at them, but then kind of gets distracted and wanders off.
It's probably the black boxes, right?
Maybe. And apparently it looked like really weird and kind of like it was in pain. Yeah. So there's that. I don't know how important that might be for later. But, all the wildlife it's like we get an implication that the wildlife is being affected by this area too in weird ways, right? Mm-hmm. I'm going to say the word weird a lot in this podcast.
I'm going to say the words weird and exploration, like 50 times each.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to the exploration.
The weird exploration.
They head down into this tower, and so all but the psychologist head down. She stays up at the top to kind of guard, and sends down the other three. When they get down in there, they find these cursive letters and words written on the wall in this script that is just like painting up and down kind of on the left side of the wall, very specifically on the left. And it's this continuous, unbroken stream of words. And they read them, and that's what we read at the very beginning. And they don't really make much sense. And it's also like one sentence. Like it never terminates with a period. It's just an ongoing run-on sentence. And they get an implication that this goes down into the next level and goes further down and further down. She inspects the letters and finds out that it is actually some sort of like biomass, some sort of like moss type stuff or some sort of fungi that's growing in the form of these words. And it's got this like phosphorescence. And as she's inspecting it, she even like scolds herself for being kind of a rookie move. She like leans forward, and then her presence makes it shoot spores. And she feels herself breathe in some of the spores. And we're just like, oh, fuck.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is like, I'm like, okay. So I kind of see where we're going. Because she's already like acting a little crazy because of the area. And then, you know, somebody gets affected by something like this. And then she's either going to like become one with it, or like have a bad reaction to it, or get some sort of powers.
Or an alien burst out of their chest.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, we don't know. But so she doesn't tell anyone that she is infected, or like whatever, that it's happened. She keeps it a secret, and instead she says like, you know, we shouldn't get too close to this. You know, it could be dangerous.
Well, yeah, nobody saw it spray her. Nobody saw it shoot the spores at her. So she can kind of like be like, oh yeah, let's get out of here because the spores are probably dangerous.
Yeah, and they decide to go back up. They've only come down like to the first level and seen this text, and but they want to get to base camp tonight. So they decide to kind of go back up. But the whole time we get this feeling that like she's really fascinated by this place and like really interested in it, and part of her like wants to just walk down and keep going down further and further, but she has to like pull away. And so they leave, reconvene, and head back up to base camp. When they're at base camp, they all kind of get drunk, have their first night in Area X, and they feel like they're kind of bonding a little bit. And then we hear this weird thing. I don't know what this is, but I want to hear what you think it is. There's this thing that they call like a howl that happens apparently every night. That it's like at sunset, it howls. And actually, I don't even know if this is their first night. They might have been here a night or two before this. I don't know. It's kind of unclear. Because it seems like they are aware of this howl thing. But anyway, because they're drunk, they like howl back at it, mimicking the sound, and then it amplifies, and sounds like it's getting angry, and so then they stop because they're like, oh shit, we didn't know it was like gonna do that.
Yeah, I mean that's super scary. That's like, oh fuck, that's a super like teenagers in a horror movie thing to do, but it was wild. I was like, okay, yeah. So you're just gonna piss off monsters now?
Yeah, and what I like about this, and why I say creepy a lot, is like it's a lot of just like on the edges, a lot of just like things unseen and unknown. And because he keeps everything shrouded in mystery so well, it can be creepy. It's the opposite of what Rawhead Rex we talked about, right? Mm-hmm. Like when we saw that terrible movie, you know, they showed the monster in the first like 2 minutes of the movie. Boom, there he is, full broad daylight. You can see his entire really terrible looking suit. Mm. You know, this is the polar opposite of that. Everything is just suggested and hinted at and mysterious. And because of that, you can really build this tension and dread, right?
Yeah. I mean, fear, yeah, I think it's just always the fear of the unknown is so much scarier than what you can put on page or screen. So I think lean into that for as long as you can.
Yeah, nothing is I mean, this is something that's famous. I'm not making this up. But nothing is as frightening as your imagination. Like, it will not, no thing you can show an audience is ever going to be as terrifying as the unknown. I think it's like I think it might have been a Hitchcock thing. Yeah. The unknown is always the most terrifying thing. And that's absolutely what Vandermeer's playing with here. So I should also say that during this time, the psychologist says a phrase that activates like a hypnotic suggestion mode, where all of the other party members kind of get slack-jawed in this like weird state where they become very suggestive, and our main character realizes this is happening and pretends. But we find that for some reason she's immune to the suggestion now. And the psychologist suggests that they all are going to go back to the tunnel tomorrow. They're going to remain calm, and they're going to continue to see the tunnel as being made out of coquina and stone. And then they're going to remain calm and be satisfied and like all this stuff. And then she snaps her fingers, and they all kind of snap out of it. And they're like, she's programmed them, I guess, to go back. And I think it's very ominous. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to continue to see it as this thing that like, we're like, wait a minute, why are you going to continue to see it? That's how I thought it was.
So now we know that it's like, what is this thing? Like this weird place that's not a tunnel or a tower or whatever. I don't know.
Well, and it also introduces the idea that the psychologist knows a lot more than she's letting on.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely. And I mean, I think in this scene, she kind of the biologist kind of says to herself that she already assumes that it was because of the spores that she like is getting some sort of abilities from it.
She's like, maybe the spores has given me some sort of immunity to it. Yeah. All right, so that's the end of part 1. And before we get to part 2, I want to take a second to stop and talk to you about Audible. We already mentioned it earlier, but that's a great service, and they were nice enough to give us an affiliate link, audibletrial.com/ink2film.
Yeah, it's a great service. With that Audible link, you get 30 free days for their service and 1 free audiobook in their huge collection.
Yeah, I mean, audiobooks, I already said earlier that I use them a ton, and I think the thing that I love about them is how much that you can multitask. I've talked about this before, but I mean, it's great. It's great. You can use them while you're driving, while you're walking, walking the dogs, doing laundry, whatever it might be. If you like podcasts, you're probably going to like audiobooks. And it's a good way to learn things and make sure, you're keeping your mind from going insane. Or maybe you want to go insane. Speaking of that, my suggestion is going to be H.P. Lovecraft. Yes, you know him. But I bet you probably, some of you probably haven't read him. I am sorely lacking in my knowledge of Lovecraft. I really want to read more of his stuff. The reason I bring it up is he's well known as being kind of this weird fiction master. And when I looked on Audible, there is a ton of Lovecraft on here. There's the Complete Omnibus, Volume 1, 2, 3. There's a Necronomicon. I know one I've definitely heard of called At the Mountains of Madness. There's all kinds of Lovecraft stuff on here. So if you're a fan of Lovecraft, I think listening to an audiobook could be a good way to experience it. And you can do that by using our link.
The link again is audibletrial.com/ink2film.
All right, let's get back into it. Part 2, integration.
So, I mean, I did want to say something about these titles real quick. I feel like for me, and maybe this is him messing with me because I don't know how the story ultimately ends, but I feel like these chapter titles are like pretty telling, like almost like spoilery of like kind of the things that are going on with our main character.
Interesting. I guess I didn't really think of it that way, but I can see that, I guess. Initiation, honestly, I didn't think about that at all. That's like a chapter 1 title for like, you make that a title of a lot of different chapter 1s, right?
Yeah.
It's really this second one where I kind of was like, oh, interesting. This is called integration. That sounds ominous. You know what I mean? Like, that sounds like they're being, I don't know, fused with something or like integrated,
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It definitely gets me thinking and making me feel like maybe I know where things are going. But like I said, I'm so uncomfortable by design that I really don't know. And I continue to be surprised by what actually happens.
Yeah.
When you wake up in the morning, here's another big surprise. Wake up in the morning and the anthropologist is missing. Somewhere in the night, she disappeared. And the psychologist is like favoring her side, and it looks like maybe she was wounded. And when they ask her, like, what happened, the psychologist says the anthropologist just decided to head back. She was too unnerved by everything they've seen, and she left without telling anyone else, apparently.
And left her gear.
Yeah, and like left her gear and all kinds of suspicious stuff, right? The main character, like, is immediately super skeptical of it, and the psychologist does another suggestion where she tries to do this, like, mental suggestion, and she's being very manipulative and trying to be like, everything's okay. And the surveyor, which is the other character now, so it's the surveyor and the biologist, they kind of share a look with each other like, this is fucking weird, but okay, we're going to go with it. And the psychologist, when she does the suggestion, it's when they get back to the tower, and she suggests that it's okay for her to remain up top and stand guard, and they are going to go down, as and see what's going on in this tower. It works on the surveyor. Like, the surveyor is like, okay, that makes sense. But the main character has to, like, pretend that it's fine, pretend that she's getting hypnotized. But yeah, they go down in it. So this fucking tower is weird as shit. First off, it's a tower that's not a tower. It's actually a hole. And they kind of descend into it, and it's got multiple layers. And it seems to just be kind of like a chamber of some sort, and then some stairs that go down to another chamber on top of each other. Seems like maybe it turns around. You must turn around probably. But it's like a bunch of just layers of the same thing, right? Descending down an unknown amount of distance. And as they walk, they find these letters just continue and, just keep going, these words. And she finds now that she has this, like, new level of perception. And she no longer sees the walls as being stone. She sees them as being somehow biological. And she hears this beating, like a beating heart. And she realizes that these perceptions are things that the surveyor is not getting at all. And she even tries to it's like she grabs the surveyor's hand and puts it against the wall and is like, do you feel that? And the surveyor doesn't feel anything and thinks that she's insane. And it's funny because she thinks she's insane. And we go, yeah, she would think you're insane. And then I kind of go, wait a minute, maybe she is insane. You know what I mean? Like, if it wasn't for the psychologist stuff, like, she would seem completely insane right now.
Yeah. I just feel like she's getting, like, these powers or something, or an affinity for the life or the wildlife in Area X. Because it seems like she's starting to see things.
Well, if you take that term integration, right? Like, she's kind of becoming one with it, and so maybe in that sense she is able to understand it and perceive it more clearly. And that's when I say when my perception of her changes over time, I start to think that she is actually perceiving more of the truth that's going on here, and it's like crazy shit. But I believe her when she's seeing things, I guess.
Yeah. I think this happens, like, fairly close by, but there's, like, this blur. The line is blurred between, like, her affinity towards this wildlife, because we get this backstory about her when she was younger, and she, like, her family's pool got overrun with algae and wildlife, and it became an ecosystem fairly quickly, and she just like thought about how she would go out there and visit and check out all the life going on and that kind of thing. So it's obviously, like, she's a biologist and she cares about this kind of stuff, and it's like, it was like such a small gap for her to just, like, bridge to being like, I love this stuff and this is my life, to being like, it seems like she's, like, leaning into something that she's always loved anyway.
Yeah, and when I said that her observations are really esoteric, that's what I mean. It's very couched in this scientific language, and we get an idea that she's an expert. So when she says, I'm looking at this fungus and it's not normal, like, something about it is unusual, or I've never seen this, like, she talks about these little organisms that are shaped like hands that I think are very, very small, and they're in the lettering. So there's some sort of, like, creature living in the lettering that was left by something else. But my point is, when she says that, we believe her. You know what I mean? Like, she's speaking with authority. And it's not just like she doesn't know. It's like there isn't anything like this in the known world. And she knows enough to speak on that, emphatically. Speaking of thing, yeah, there's also a moment where her and the surveyor realize that the lettering is getting like brighter and fresher. And so they start to think that as they're going down, something has been writing this and they're drawing closer to it. And as that happens, they realize that they call it something, or the main character calls it something. And the surveyor says, well, why not someone? And she's like, it couldn't be. Like, she's got this really strong impression, and no real good reason, I guess, except for we find out later a little bit more. But it really is just this impression she has that it's a thing and not a person that's doing this. So as they're going down, the surveyor notices there's some sort of slime on the ground that they've been like walking on. It's like this trail leading down. It's gotten thicker as they've gone lower and lower. And this is something apparently the biologist has been noticing for a while, but was waiting because she didn't know if the surveyor was going to perceive it or not. And this is another sign that they're following something, because it's leaving this trail, right? Like this like slimy trail. And I don't know when they do it, but eventually they start calling it the crawler, this unknown thing that they're pursuing. And I don't know, this idea of like going down farther and farther underground in the darkness, and this weird creature that's like emitting language for an unknown reason, and they're getting closer and closer to it, like that, it just is like a mounting tension that was really cool to me, like really affecting.
Yeah,
you know,
I agree. It was really tense, and as it went on, he took his time too. Like it wasn't like it was gonna. I had no idea when it was gonna happen.
Yeah, and so the first thing that happens, like the change, is they see these boot prints that show that somebody else has been down here and come back up and like stepped in this slime stuff. And I don't know about you, but that totally caught me by surprise. Like, what? There's somebody else down here? Like, there's all these weird things. And so they go down further, and in this other really cool moment, the surveyor sees something first and reacts and like jumps back and pulls our main character away, and is clearly really shaken. And I thought it was so affecting because it's like we don't get to perceive it because we're perceiving things only through the biologist. And so instead we get it relayed, you know, second hand, third hand, whatever. Like,
it's as if it happened to us in real life. So it's like, it would be
it's
the
really
same
cool.
thing if like someone pulled you away from something and you didn't see it. You'd be like, holy shit, what happened? You know what I mean?
What happened in there? Like, what did you see? And so the surveyor says she saw like a shape or a body like slumped against the wall. And we're like, could this be the thing writing? We don't know. But they go down to investigate, and they've been doing this for a while, so they're really deep now. And they both kind of agree before they go into the room that no matter what is in there, this is going to be the last room they go into, and then they're going to head back up. And they go down, and they find that the anthropologist who was said to have left is actually here, and she is like, I can't remember at all. She's like burned, her face is burned, her jaw's like broken, her legs are like fused together, she's slumped against the wall, she has some sort of green ash that's spilled out of her mouth and is like piled on her chest. It's really weird. And she's also got like these like sample vials around her and like some of her gear and stuff. And yeah, this really like crazy thing, looking scene. And then the surveyor kind of goes to the next set of stairs and is kind of like keeping watch while the biologist inspects the body. And the biologist comes up with this theory about what happened. And she thinks that, because she sees some other boot prints, I think, she thinks that the psychologist came down with the anthropologist last night while they were sleeping and forced the anthropologist to come up to the crawler, whatever it is, and try and take a sample, and then it got killed. And then when she got killed, the psychologist like just left and came back, fled, I guess. And so it adds another layer of like, whatever this thing is, it's crazy dangerous, right?
Yeah. And it's like she's burned and like mutated, and like it's just like, what could have done that?
Green ash coming out of like, what is that even? Like, what is it's so crazy, right? And yeah, as they leave, the last thing she notices is that one of the vials has like some sort of dark mass in it, And she's like, oh, this is, she imagines that it's like a sample that she took right before she died. And so she collects that sample and takes it with them. And they head back up. They decide to head back up together. And on our way back, the main, the main character shares with the surveyor that the psychologist has been hypnotizing them. And it's interesting because the surveyor doesn't believe her at first. And I guess I get that. You know what I mean? Like I haven't been hypnotized. What are you talking about? And so it's interesting because it's like her trying to convince her that it has, but then like she has no real proof of it other than the weirdness of the situation. And so it seems that now the surveyor is really skeptical of our main character and the psychologist, and they're just like, nobody gets along right now. Everybody's very skeptical of each other.
Yep.
So when they emerge from the tower, finally, the psychologist is gone, which is the other thing they totally didn't expect. Because there was also this like real danger of the psychologist being above them and like her being like having basically killed the anthropologist. Like what's going to happen? But she's not there. They come out, she's gone. So they go back to base camp. She's not there either. She's taken a bunch of supplies and guns with her though, and left somewhere. At this point, the surveyor says, okay, I'm going to choose to believe you, but I still am not 100% on board kind of thing. And over the next little bit, they test with their findings. They've been taking pictures while they were down there, I should say. So they develop their pictures, which they have to do in like a really old, like in like a dark room tent kind of thing. And all the pictures apparently don't come out well. Like they're very blurry and they don't show much of anything. The main character thinks that that's because the walls were like vibrating from this like beating heart thing, and that caused the photos to be blurry. But it's unclear if that's the truth. That's just what she thinks,
Right.
And then she tests the sample of she tests a lot of the samples she took first off, it shows a bunch of like weird slime and like mysterious substances, and it's everything's like weird and off. And then she tests that last one, and it comes back as being some sort of brain matter. Possibly even like human brain matter, but she knows that can't be true. So what did you make of that? Because that was really weird.
I'm not really sure. Like, I feel like it had something to do with what was going on with the anthropologist. Like, I think it was probably her brain matter, maybe, or
her own brain matter,
maybe, but I doubt it. I mean, I guess she would have had to have bottled it, so it doesn't make any sense unless the creature did it. I don't know.
Yeah, man. The only thing I can come up with, because she even says like it doesn't make sense that the brain matter was collected, because she would have just swiped at something on the exterior of this thing, of the crawler. And for it to come back as brain matter, like I keep thinking that. Well, later on we learned that like maybe there was a lot more expeditions and a lot more people have died here than has been let on. And I feel like this thing is some sort of like human composition.
Yeah, I started to get
and that maybe these are like multiple human brains or something that have like well, because like how else does it know language? You know what I mean? So
exactly.
Even though it's kind of nonsensical, it does have language that it's writing for some reason. And so, like, my theory right now is that it's some sort of weird brain golem creature, whatever thing that's being driven by. But that's just like I have no real basis for that. That's just what my imagination is going wild with it.
It could be that like something similar that's happening to our biologist happened to somebody else before. And this is what you become, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. So the next thing is that they decide, they say that they're, our main character is like still gung-ho for this mission, by the way, which I think is funny. Like she doesn't want to leave at all. The surveyor's like, we should probably leave. This expedition is fucked. She's like, no, I'm not leaving.
Well, it's also, it seems to be like the influence of the place that she's in. Like she wants to stay. Yeah.
She's feeling this like undeniable draw, right? And she says either we're going to go down to the tower tomorrow or we're going to go to the lighthouse, which I don't think I've mentioned yet. But the lighthouse is this thing that is on the map that they can see on the horizon often. And so it's this like touchstone for them. And during the night, she also sees some sort of like weird light show up in like an orange light in the lighthouse. So she has a theory that maybe the psychologist has gone to the lighthouse. So she wants to go to the lighthouse, but the surveyor does not want to go to the lighthouse. And she says, I'll stay here while you go ahead and I'll wait for you. And our biologist can't convince her to go. So the biologist heads off on her own. And that's the end of section 2 here.
Yeah.
heading off to the lighthouse.
Pretty wild chapter. A lot of stuff happened.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call it a chapter as much as like a part. I don't know. I've kind of been referring to that, like thinking of it as like part of the novel, but it is kind of like a big chapter too. I don't know. The book has a weird form, and I think that underlines what I was talking about kind of making you uncomfortable in like a meta way. That there's not like clearly defined chapters, right? I also noticed that there's only page numbers on every other page, and then sometimes there just won't be a page number on a first page of a part and stuff. And I feel like that also is like a subconscious thing to kind of fuck with you a little bit.
Huh. I hadn't even noticed.
I don't know if you get that.
I don't know if
yeah, you probably don't get that in the ebook. That might just be a physical book thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool.
So we get a lot of memory and our main character kind of thinking about her life as a biologist and her studies and her relationship with her husband. But plot-wise, she goes to this village that's like the halfway point to the tower, and in there she finds these like weird, I'm using that word, bizarre growths. Yeah, it's these growths that you've probably seen in the trailer if you've seen it that look kind of like people, and they're like all throughout this village, and she doesn't know what to make of them. Which is really bizarre and off-putting. And then she just kind of goes on. She can't do anything about it. She takes some samples, I guess, and that's it. They're not alive or anything. I mean, other than they are alive, but they're like plants of some kind. She sees another weird thing happens. She sees dolphins surface in this river, and one of them looks at her, and she has this strong impression of it having human eyes as it looks at her, and then it disappears beneath the water. And that was so creepy to me. Like, I loved it. It was so good. She's like, I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like it had human eyes. So eventually she reaches the lighthouse. And this lighthouse is a war zone. Like, there's all this evidence of battles, like fights going on. Oh, first off, it's also like heavily fortified from the outside with like barbed wire and big walls that have been built up and stuff. And as she travels up it, there's all this evidence of people killing each other and just like blood. There's like old blood stains and bullet holes are in like everywhere, and she thinks that all of the different expeditions have like come here to seek refuge because everybody can see it while you're in Area X. But it looks like things just don't go well here, right? Like stuff goes to shit here. She eventually reaches the very top of the lighthouse and discovers, and you know, also this whole time I should say she's really worried that the psychologist is waiting for her there and is gonna like shoot at her. But she doesn't end up being there at the top, and she gets to the top and there's no one there, and she's like, what the hell? And then she kind of looks around and she finds this hatch in the floor, which she opens up, and we get another what the fuck moment, because there's this crazy chamber inside the lighthouse that's hidden under this hatch that has a giant heap of old journals. And it's described as being like 12 feet tall and 15 feet wide. Like a gigantic heap of old journals, and it's like moldering and wet and like got fungus growing all through it and all this stuff, and it's kind of becoming one with the area. But this is this oh shit moment for her, because she realizes that there has been way more people and way more expeditions than she was ever told, which was another big surprise to me. Really, really cool.
Definitely didn't see that coming. I guess there's like different. Each number had like a couple of letters worth of missions as well. And like all of these journals have been being collected, obviously, and anybody who does come back kind of forgets. And I think we've seen the scene about the husband at this point, right?
Yeah. If you want to talk about that.
So she kind of just talks about how she's sleeping one night when her husband has gone on an expedition, and she like,
on his expedition here,
expedition, and to Area X, and she like wakes up to hearing noise and like runs out, and like he's like in the fridge like rummaging around, drinking milk and eating food, and he doesn't remember anything, and he's just kind of not the same.
Yeah, and then they have sex, which I thought was interesting too, because I immediately was like, oh, was that some sort of initial, transmission of something? You know what I mean? Because he was somehow infected.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, I thought of that. I was like, I wonder if she initially got because then the thing gets into her mind where she decides she wants to do an expedition of her own. Oh, we should talk about what happens with the husband.
Right.
So this is a big spoiler. I'm sure it's gonna be a big movie spoiler, so you've been warned. The husband dies of cancer. He ends up having to go to a facility, and he has this amnesia where she feels like he never really remembers who he is. Like, it's all very distant. And he's in this, like, fog.
Yeah, he'd been, like, a really passionate
Yeah.
guy and very, like, into everything. And then when he came back, he was very, like, dull and not very excited about things and kind of, like you said, like, in a fog.
Yeah, and then come to find out he has some sort of cancer and he dies. And every other member of the expedition, his expedition, who all came back similar to him, all got cancer, and they all end up dying from it. And you know what happens when your husband dies from cancer from a bizarre place? You decide you want to go there too.
Yeah,
because that's what happened with her, and that's why I thought maybe she did get maybe she got something, because she, for almost inexplicably, really wants to go.
Yeah.
After this,
early on in the book, I think she talks about how she's talking about other people's motivations, and she doesn't really care what they are, but she doesn't know everybody else's motivations. But hers are that she doesn't really have anything else going on, and she wants answers.
And she really wants to. I think she is really intrigued by the mystery of her husband and what happened to him, and she the only way to get to the truth of it is to go experience it for herself, I guess.
So I think this is a good point to start talking about some of the overall, because we're winding down. There's still some more, but
yeah.
So it's kind of we have to decide whether we think that this company that's sending these people in here, are they doing something to the people?
Well, I think it's the government. I think it's a branch of the government.
I forget what it's called right now, but there's a name for it.
The Southern Reach.
Oh yeah, Southern Reach. So is it that do they not want people to talk about the things that happen in here, so they're hypnotizing them and giving them cancer and all of these things? Is it something that happened when he was in Area X? I think it's there's some conspiracies going on here.
I absolutely don't trust the government here. But I think it's more that they don't understand it, but they have little regard for the people they send in. I think the people they send in are being viewed as just tools and test specimens to see what happens. And so I think their expeditions are probably given different sets of parameters, different sets of things they're allowed to do and supposed to do. And then I think it's all about just seeing what happens, because they're trying to figure out what the nature of this place is. And the secrecy, I think, is all bound up, and they don't want people to find out what they're doing because so many people have died.
Yeah.
And yeah, I absolutely think that they're every step of the way they're lying, because they're trying to manipulate the subjects of these experiments, essentially, to go in and willfully go in and do some things so that they can try and get what information they can, and just observe them and try and figure out what's going on with them. And I don't know.
I mean, not to mention the fact, I
think they're very shady.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that the psychologist knows way more than she was letting on, and she may have been on multiple missions into this place, and just based on her powers of persuasion and things that she knows.
Well, and it's all very removed too, which makes it seem I don't know, they talk about people who are schizophrenic and paranoid, believing that the government's after them, and seeing people following them and seeing things that aren't there. And if she's having any of those symptoms, they could be manifesting in this way too, because she's perceiving everything that the Southern Reach has done as being, having ulterior motives and all this stuff. Now, it does seem like the evidence we're given backs that up, but we're also giving it through her. So if she's just completely lost her mind and we're just reading the ravings of a lunatic, you know what I mean? We're kind of going to believe it too, because that's the only perception we're getting.
Right. And I mean, I've bought into most of it, and honestly, I've gotten to the point where I'm if I was in this, I mean, not really, but in terms of the story, I think it's interesting that she's leaning into this affinity that she has for the biological goings on of this place, and that she's I want to see more of it and where it's going to end up. Yeah,
this is another moment where she's looking at this heap of journals, and she talks to the reader, and she says I don't know if you can imagine what it'd be like to have your perceptions shattered and realize that, all these things. And then she's like, but maybe you can. Perhaps you can. Perhaps you're staring at it now. And so there's this really cool idea that maybe we're another expedition that's come after the fact, and maybe we found her journal and that's why we're reading it. And she realizes that this is a possibility. So I don't know. That stuff still it gives me chills. I don't know. It's so cool. It really draws me personally into the story.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. I think that's so cool, because it does work so well, like you say, and it adds a little bit of lore that they don't even need to flesh out. Like it's like we are a part of that, or I don't know. It's awesome.
So with this heap of journals, she digs through it, and I don't know about you, but I totally saw this coming. And then even when it happened, she says it feels inevitable. She ends up finding her husband's journal with his direct account of what happened, but she's unable to read it right now. She like can't bring herself to read it. She does take it. She also takes several other journals she finds. There's some interesting things that go on. Like I really like the way he describes. She in every account she reads, there's like a mysterious force at work. She describes it as like in the spaces between what's being written. And I love it because you can't tell if it's just her losing her mind or her being like really perceptive. And she thinks of it as being like the crawler and like it all being bound up in that. She talks about this like one journal where it's just like a bunch of observations of this like shrubbery or something like over and over again. But she feels like it's that the author of it was trying to focus on something simple to like keep out the madness and not like think about what's going on. Also, there's this really weird journal entry about them like being in the tower like under siege from the sea, and like they're like some sort of attackers and wildlife or something, and how like members of the party are getting killed, and it says like there are things happening that defy rational explanation. And like I don't know, it's so cool because like nothing is ever given like a concrete definition. It's all just really, nebulous. Like what is attacking? Like what happened here? We don't know. Why did like some people kill each other? It seems like I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the main thing, she finds her husband's journal and she decides she's going to take it and several others and go back to base camp and share them with the surveyor, I guess, right? And she goes to leave, but before she leaves, she decides she's going to go up to the very top level and go out on the edge and like where you can see over all of Area X, because this is like the best vantage point, right? And she goes up there and looks around and she's kind of, appreciating how it all looks. And the sun's starting to set, which is a little ominous because she even talks about how she wants to get back before the sun like fully sets and it's dark out. But as she's looking around, she looks down at the beach and she sees a foot and a leg and a boot, and realizes that something is down there, and she thinks that it's the psychologist's like leg and boot. She recognizes the pants or something. She's like, that's the psychologist, but it doesn't appear to be moving, and it's like, I don't know. How was it? It was something like going on the beach, right?
Yeah, I mean that's really all it was, and like this is literally where I stopped. Right? Is this where you stopped?
Yeah, this is the end. This is the end of the section. Like she's like, oh shit, that's the psychologist, and then boom, that's it. That's the end of this section.
I'm assuming
which is where we stopped reading.
There's no way she's dead, because there has to be some sort of. I mean, I guess she could
be dead.
She could be dead, but I just think I just think narratively it'd be way more interesting if she wasn't dead and like something happened to her or something, but she's still alive.
Well, she could be dead and have like, I don't know, somehow still clues. Communicate beyond the grave, kind of thing, like a journal or something that she's able to get some sort of hint of what's going on.
Sure.
But how is she dead? Like, what killed her? It's so hard for us to even speculate. That's the other thing. I thought that this was going to be us speculating about what we think is going to happen in the second half, and we should try, I guess. But man, it's going to be tough because, like we've been saying it a lot, but like we don't have a lot to go on.
Yeah,
everything is so mysterious,
Well, and I feel like the story is better for it because, like we talked about it before, like the unknown and the exploration of this story is kind of what I'm really engaged in.
Man, I'm like so excited to read the rest of this novel.
Yeah.
This has been a lot of fun for me. When I was talking about like my background and stuff, I think it's the literary nature of this novel. I appreciate it and I like it, and I love that it's wrapped up in a story that to me at its heart is a very genre story.
Yeah.
Because it is a very, it's a team of scientists going into a weird area with like some sort of maybe alien, maybe inner Earth, maybe who knows.
Well, yeah, I definitely agree that it's very genre. Explain to me a little bit how, like, what makes it more literary than genre in this case.
A lot of literary stuff. It's a lot of the slower sections where she's perceiving the world, and there's literature. When I speak of literary writing, is an attempt to look at the world and life in a new way, so that when you read it, you feel like maybe your perceptions have changed, and that you see something in a new way, and it enriches your life in like a weird way. And like, people can get addicted to this sort of stuff. And if you really love literature, this is what you look for. You want to feel like your life has been changed by reading something, and the way you perceive the world has been changed because of this, what you read. Genre is, by comparison, now it can do some of that. And a lot of, and it often does. There's a lot of blurring between the lines. But genre, is maybe a little bit more concerned with telling a story. You know what I mean? With having a plot, with having things happen. You know what I mean? That's, and that's the criticism of literary stuff, is that not a lot happens. It tends to be a lot more just like observations about life and stuff, right? Yeah. People may disagree with me on that definition, but when I say the literary quality of this, it's a lot of like her looking at the environment and looking at the, things, and thinking about how, I don't know, like the perceptions of it, and how it's she's seeing like the hidden truth of the universe kind of in the everyday. I should also say this whole book reminds me a lot of True Detective. I don't, you've seen season 1, right? Yeah, and that's based off a lot of like similar works that I've referenced with like Lovecraft and other stuff like that. And it's not in its philosophy as much as it's unknowable, kind of like the insanity parts of the True Detective stuff, right? Like the unknowable references, and they talk about the King in Yellow, and that's this whole other thing, like meta text stuff. But I won't get into it. But my point is just that I think somewhere like these two have a similar thing in their DNA. Like if you really like True Detective, you're probably gonna like this book, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I'm really enjoying it so far, and I cannot wait to finish the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I was a little hesitant. Like, I was worried I was going to get on this podcast with you, and you were going to be like, so I was excited for this book, but I fucking hate it. Like, honestly, I was a little worried. I felt like it could go either way with you. I wasn't sure.
So something interesting with me as far as stories are concerned, I like to see uniqueness. So, like, if it's like, regardless of if it's necessarily my cup of tea, I like to think that if something's new to me, something is brought to the table that I've never seen before, or like I say, is unique, I think that speaks volumes just in terms of like because I feel like it's about innovating, right? So it's like you can't just keep redoing, like everybody says, like the same however many 5 stories or whatever make up every story ever, and yet like people find so many ways to creatively do something different. And I think even if I didn't like, and I love this book, I really enjoy it, but even if I didn't like this book, I like to think I would like it just for the sheer fact that it's unique. I've never read anything like this before, and it's just fun.
Yeah. I could get up on a soapbox about that whole thing, but I won't, because we're running a little long on time. Remind me in some other podcast to talk about that, the whole idea that there's only a certain number of stories that can be told and all that stuff. But yeah, this I agree. This book is super unique. The story's really interesting. I love the juxtaposition of the tower, quote unquote, that is actually a hole in the ground, and then the lighthouse, which is another tower type structure. I don't know what that means, but I thought it was really interesting that that's our 2 main locations we've seen, right?
Yeah.
Are these 2 like an inverse and you know what I mean, of a tower is essentially what the first place is. I love the way he blends the atmosphere and the landscape and everything else seamlessly into the changing perspectives of our main character. And then, the paranoia and like how little these characters trust each other, and like how quickly they seem to be turning on each other. Like, it's all just really good, fascinating stuff. And I'm along for the ride. I don't know how this thing's going to end, honestly. It could be an alien. It could be some sort of like inner Earth thing. We don't know anything about the event. Like, what was the event? No one, you know what I mean? Like, we don't know.
I'm interested to find out more about that. That is true.
I'm such a sucker for like stories about government, like fucking people and like using them as guinea pigs and all this stuff too. Yeah. Like, I love that part of it too, because I feel like the government's being super shady on top of an already terrible like place situation, and like they're just making it worse almost. You know,
definitely.
I'm all in. I'm really enjoying it. But yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about the first half here. You got anything else?
I mean, I just keep coming back to how excited I am for this movie, man. I'm loving this book, and I'm so excited to this. I think this is going to be an extremely hard, when it comes down to picking book or movie, this is going to be a tough one. I can already tell.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I can already see how people are going to go, like, or how people, when they first heard this movie announced, were skeptical,
Yeah.
because this, I can see how this book it's so cerebral. How are you going to convey that on film? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about like how Alex Garland is going to be able to pull that off? Because so much of this stuff is so
Well, I mean, like
so into her mind.
a lot of what I mean. Okay, so he hasn't done all that much. He's been involved in writing, but Ex Machina I think was his first directorial role. And I mean, just watching Ex Machina, I can just draw comparisons to this. Like that's a film that was steeped in cerebral. I mean, not quite this. It doesn't go this far. Like this is definitely taken to the next level. But he like you're talking about the nature of literature and the way that it's like it's not necessarily things don't have to be happening all the time. It's like taking a moment to stop and smell the roses and kind of like understand what's going on and like to connect to these people not through the not through dialogue, but through what you perceive them as feeling and kind of like letting the story play out, not necessarily just through dialogue, but also through conveyed, portrayals of the characters and that kind of thing. So anyway, I think that he's gonna do a lot of the same things that he did with Ex Machina for a different genre. This is like we say, it's like the weird sci-fi, whereas before it was kind of the, AI future, kind of what does it mean to be human thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the trailer I think is almost casting this as more of a horror, but also mixed with like weird sci-fi. Anyway, I think we've run out of time here. Before we do our thank yous, I wanted to go ahead and say that I have a short story that's going to be published in Metaphorosis magazine that is also pretty weird. And that's going to come out on March 2nd, so you can look for that. And I think it's free to read, so you should be able to check it out. I just saw the cover art for the issue, and it's gorgeous. Not drawn, for my story, but I think it's fitting. It looks really good, and it matches. So I'm really excited about that. I hope you guys all check that out.
Yeah, you sent it to me. The cover looks great, and congratulations, man. Really proud of you.
Thanks. All right, that's going to be it for us. If you wanted to connect with us, we are all over social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Ink2Film on all three. I'm also on Goodreads, Luke Elliott. You can find me on there, and I'm trying to get James on there. Hopefully he'll be on soon.
Sure will.
I think we're going to start up like a little book club if you wanted to join, following along as we read. But yeah, reach out, connect with us. We'd love to see you on there. Oh, and when we share episodes, if you're feeling helpful, you could go ahead and share our episodes and help spread the word, get it out to your friends and people who you think might be interested in this show. And that would be a huge help to us.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Also, if you wanted to leave feedback in any way, any sort of comments, questions, anything you wanted to send our way, you can send that to ink2film@gmail.com, and we might even read some of your stuff on the air.
Yeah, I'd love to get some takes about this novel and what you think. Where you think, did you love it? Did you hate it? Do you think how do you think our reaction has been? And we just ask that you don't spoil anything, just in case we haven't finished it by the time we read that email. But yeah, we'd also love it if you could rate and review our podcast. That continues to be a great way to help us spread the word. That and subscribing. But yeah, leave us a review on any number of sites. We got one coming to you from Facebook here, 5 stars, from Jill. She says, loved it. Definitely makes me want to read the book before the movie comes out. Thanks. Perfect review. So something like that would be great.
That was a shout out from my mom. Thanks, Mom. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mom.
All right, and we also just wanted to say thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music. And also thank you to Audible. Again, our Audible affiliate link is audibletrial.com/ink2film. And with that, you get 30 free days and 1 free credit for any audiobook in their collection.
All right, so that's going to be it for this week. We will be back next week with part 4 and 5 and our pre-movie expectations. So look forward to that. We hope you'll join us. Until then, I'm the writer.
And I'm the filmmaker.
See ya.